And all of the Marlins and Mets have come out of their dugouts. Michael Wacha takes off his hat, and all the Mets on the field are removing their hats as well. And now, after a moment of silence that lasted 42 seconds, the day before we celebrate Jackie Robinson Day, the Mets are exiting the field after both teams exchanged a wave of caps to one another. So it would appear as though, after a poignant moment, that the Mets and Marlins will not be playing baseball tonight.
What we're seeing from athletes this week, particularly black athletes who've spoken in emotional and raw terms about their own personal experiences, will be its own chapter in American history. What you just saw was from last night. The New York Mets and Miami Marlins, they were supposed to play a game yesterday. Instead, they observed 42 seconds of silence in honor of the mighty Jackie Robinson, who wore that number when he broke Major League Baseball's color barrier. And then after that, you saw it on that tape, they tipped their caps and left the field, leaving behind a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on home plate. They did not play their game. And it's just the latest in what's become a cascade of powerful boycotts and demonstrations in the world of sports, largely set in motion by the NBA players who decided to boycott their own playoffs. They started a cross-sport movement. That Mets game was one of 7 in Major League Baseball, postponed yesterday, along with 3 games in the WNBA. On top of that, every NHL playoff game last night and today postponed, semifinal tennis matches at the Western and Southern Open suspended, and 9 NFL teams called off their practices. But today, perhaps a new chapter in the effort. The NBA announced that games would resume tomorrow, but that's not the whole story. The league and its players also agreed to establish a social justice coalition, as well as an effort to open arenas and stadiums for voting. It's an historic moment in time, described so well by our friend Jemele Hill and Carrie Champion on their show, Carrie and Jemele Stick to Sports.
I understand why they came back to play, the NBA players, but I think I would have liked to see them not play. And that is because there's a part of me, the anger inside of me, I feel like they feel, is that America, until you can respect Black bodies in the streets, you don't get to be entertained by them.
Despite what anybody wants to say, we have America's attention. We as Black folks, we as Black journalists, we as Black people, as a community have America's attention, whether they want to listen to it or not. And they can fight us and divide us all they want. But what we're saying at the end of the day, we're no longer a commodity. This is the fact of the matter. We are humans. This is about humanity.
Joining us now, co-hosts of the new late-night talk show on Vice TV, Carrie and Jemele Stick to Sports, Jemele Hill and Carrie Champion, a show they created to speak honestly and candidly about being Black in America, being women in America, and being Black women in America. It's such a treat to have both of you. Jemele, so you tweeted something that really caught my attention. You said the NBA season might be canceled because of racism, not COVID. Think about that. And it really makes you stand up and appreciate how big this moment is. Talk about what you were saying on that clip there, that the anger would have felt better processed by stopping the season altogether.
Well, I think this is why you saw the Milwaukee Bucks engineer this movement that we've seen over the last couple of days among athletes across all sports. Some sports that, had you told me, Nicole, that Major League Baseball, which traditionally is a little more conservative in terms of the mentality, would have gone as far as the Mets did, leaving a Black Lives Matter t-shirt right there on the field, making such a symbolic gesture, I would have told you were crazy. And that should let people know where we are in this moment, about how much it has shaken this country, but especially the world of sports, seeing people band together. And this is on display what makes sports a unique entry point into this conversation. There's a lot of things in this country that we don't do together. We don't pray together. Most of us eat with the same people that look like us, that are from our same backgrounds. But sports is the one thing that mashes together people of different ethnicities, genders, across the economic landscape. And so it becomes a movement quite easily when you have a unifier like sports. And so the reason that I tweeted that is that I wanted people to understand, just at the breaking point that we're at, the NBA players decided not to play because they're tired. Black people across the board are tired. They're exhausted. We're having some of the same conversations that Martin Luther King Jr. and many civil rights leaders were having 50 or 60 years ago, with today being the 57th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech. You listen back to that speech and you realize we're in the same place. I mean, yes, there have been advancements and there have been progress, but the fact that we're still in the place where Black people have to beg this nation to respect our humanity, that just says it all.
You know, and Carrie, that's what the topic you're addressing in that clip we played, along with the notion that you have everybody's attention. And that is also true. I was watching this baseball game last night. I watched this happen live, and of course came one day after Dom Smith of the Mets spoke and wept about just what you're talking about. You know, people don't care. People don't care. And yes, these powerful emotional moments may finally get the justifiable amount of attention around these issues, but it's my sense that it shouldn't come to this. Men shouldn't have to bare their souls, men and women. Athletes shouldn't have to put their careers and their sports on the line. How did we get here, in your estimation, Carrie?
And that is because, first off, Nicole, thank you for having me, but that is because you get it. You see us, or you see these athletes, or you see Black men and women as what they are, humans first. We got here because this country has never wanted to have the uncomfortable conversation about racism. This country was built on racism. And when I say we are no longer commodities, slaves were commodities, bought, sold, used, trade. You could do whatever you wanted to. There was never any thought of there was a life after. When someone sees a Black man walking down the street, if your first thought, not saying all people, but if your first thought, if you're an officer, is that, okay, I might be in danger or I am concerned, you're not saying there's a father, there's a husband, there's a son. If that is not your first thought when you're dealing with them in these very tense times, then that's sad. And that's how we got here, because we have all of us inclusively, have not really told the history of what has been a part of this country since its inception. And so we're pretending as if none of this existed. And we are all, to Jamel's point, exhausted. What you saw, and I mentioned this earlier, what you saw from these NBA players was a strike, right? It wasn't necessarily a boycott. They were withholding their service because they wanted something done, right, and they now have something done. But as a result, though, what you understood about a strike was that they were mentally exhausted, because they are tired of seeing and identifying with that Black man that is who is unarmed, one, two, and then shot. Either he's dead or he is an attempted murder or it is murder. You don't know what is going to happen next. Jamel and I film our show once a week, and we thought, okay, we've covered all the shootings, correct? Now we go to work, 2 days later, there's another shooting. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
And what we're saying in plain terms, especially on our show, is that look at us and we want you to see you. We want you to see us. Please do not divide us. We are not separate. We are all the same. And I think it's time for people really, other than Blacks, to take a huge, huge look at themselves in the mirror and ask, what do I think of that person? What are my, biases or my subjective racism, as I like to call it? What do I think? And then why do I feel that way? And that's some soul searching. People aren't ready to do that. They want to believe what they believe. And unfortunately, that's how we got here. But I am so excited to say that we are at a time where we are speaking loud and in our boldness as a community, as a collective, as Americans, and we're not turning back. Listen to this. Get uncomfortable and be a part of this conversation.
And Carrie, let me just follow up with you, because it seems like the second half of that thought is vote. I mean, vote like your lives depend on it. It's a message you heard from President Obama at the Democratic speech, and it was broader than questions of race, but it certainly included them. It's a message you hear from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris every day. But how do you take, and this is an infinitely difficult proposition, I know this from politics, how do you take any emotional movement and put it behind a really kind of annoying practice? It's hard to vote. Donald Trump's making it infinitely more difficult. But how do you take all this raw emotion in sort of its pain and its beauty and get people to engage in the practice of figuring out how to vote?
It's interesting because you talked about it a little in the introduction to Jamel and myself. You talked about the turning these arenas, these NBA arenas, into voting places. That was one of the results that came out of the strike from the NBA players. LeBron was on our show, and he talked very passionately about more than a vote and how you have to vote as if your life depends on it, because it quite frankly does. So what I believe you do with all of this emotion is that you send out soldiers into the community, for lack of a better word, and you make sure that you go to those who feel as if their vote does not count. Because so many people in our community feel as if their vote doesn't matter. There's also the misinformation that there are those who feel like they can't vote because they have a crime, or they've been arrested, rather, and they might have a felony. We talked about this on our show, how so many people don't have that information. And so right now, and I'll just use LeBron James and his More Than a Vote platform, they are working with so many people in different states to make sure they're going to these targeted communities where these people normally would not vote, and trying to educate and express to them that this happens and it matters. We are in a part of a country where, a part of the world where we have social media. I find I'm always consistently pushing that, and we do have to take that emotion and we have to put it into action. I think that, believe it or not, and you can run the tape back, I think we're going to see a huge turnout. We're going to see Obama-like turnout, because that's the only thing that will get things turned around for us in this community. I think it was a huge thank you to Black women by putting Kamala Harris on the ticket. And I know that it says, if not now, when? If not now, when? And so I have this sense, I have my ear to the streets. It's not like I can speak for all Blacks, but I have a sense that they understand, and people who are traditionally marginalized understand that voting is imperative. Our life truly does depend on it.
You know, and Jamel, I was talking with Michael Steele and the Rev Sharpton and Jason Johnson in the last block. You know, the propaganda around this movement is just that. It is the new big lie. I mean, the big lie is that this is the cause of the chaos. Donald Trump in the political world is the cause of the chaos and the beneficiary of the chaos. So how do you kind of keep the faith with someone like that as an obstacle?
It's difficult, but I just got to believe, and I'm glad Carrie has this optimism, because I swing back and forth depending on the day and depending on what I read and what new fire this president has said. Yeah, right? It's hard. It's sometimes hard to kind of
Four nights of the Republican convention kind of swung me the other way. So I'm
look, Nicole, you are better than me. My nerves too bad to watch the Republican National Convention. I couldn't do it. So, but no, I mean, getting back to your question, what I've got to believe is, based off history, is the will of the people has to prevail. We've actually prevailed through far worse. Not just, this is not the first time that America's soul has been at stake in this country. And I'm not saying that when we get to these points in our history that it's pretty. It's usually ugly. It usually reveals some very uncomfortable, dark truths about what this nation is founded on, what it's about, and what it's allowed to fester. But I've just got to believe that in November, people will understand just how critical this vote is, that they will get that they need to be engaged in the political process. And I say this repeatedly, and I'm going to say it till my last breath, or whenever that long day comes far, far from now, is that if your vote was so unworthy, if it didn't matter, why is there such a campaign to take it from you? Donald Trump and the Republican Party have all but admitted that they need fewer people to vote in order to stay in power. That should tell you everything. And so that should get you even more motivated, more intentional about doing this. I know it's not going to be easy. We have a president that basically crumbled our entire postal service so that he could try to rig the election in his favor. He's purposely putting out messages trying to scare people into voting, scare his base into voting, read white people fearing Black people coming to their neighborhoods, fearing that this country is getting a little too ethnic and too diverse, and that this is the last stand of white America. He's purposely putting these messages out there and sending these signals. At the same time, he's discouraging Black people from voting and people of color in general by talking about having police and sheriffs being in the presence of these voting booths. It's an intimidation tactic that has been used throughout our history, unfortunately. And so people just have to not fall for this. They can't go for this again. We have to stand up and say this is unacceptable to have this kind of president and this kind of regime that is our leaders. This is a critical juncture, the most critical one that I've certainly experienced in my lifetime. And I hope that everybody else is willing to take this as seriously as I am.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.